Welcome back to Chess Dog, and today we have an amazing game from Magnus Carlsen. This is the Julius Baer Generations Cup, and we're now in the finals. It's Magnus Carlsen playing Arjun Erigaisi, and he makes a move in this game that's just mind-boggling. You know, listen, I love Tal and Fischer and Kasparov, but chess has moved on. The level of chess we're seeing today is beyond even those players. Let's jump right into this game. This is a rapid game, 15 minutes for each side with a 10-second increment. Arjun Erigaisi has the white pieces. Carlsen has black. E4, E5, knight F3, knight C6, and bishop to C4. The Italian game, very common at the highest levels because move orders are a little tricky and you don't get locked into forced lines. Knight F6, D3, bishop C5, C3, D6, all familiar moves. A5 allows the bishop to tuck back on A7. And Arjun Erigaisi plays bishop to G5, pinning Magnus Carlsen's knight on F6. Magnus responds with H6 and bishop to H4. And you'll notice something in this position. White's king has committed to castling, but Carlsen's king is still in the middle of the board, which means he can castle on either side. And a common idea here for white or black is to wait for one side to castle and then to just launch your pawns in front of the castled king. And it looks like that's what Carlsen is doing here. He plays the move bishop to D7, sort of an awkward move, but essentially he's just getting his pieces off the back rank so that he can put his king on the king side or the queen side, whichever he would like to do. Arjun plays rook to E1, defending the E4 pawn. This is actually a novelty in this position, but there's nothing unique about this position. The ideas are familiar. Carlsen tucks his bishop back on A7, and knight B to D2, a common theme. Then I can go to F1, G3. G5 is played by Magnus, and the bishop goes to G3. So he is launching his pawns on the king side while his own king is still in the middle of the board, which means he'll either leave his king here or end up castling on the queen side, most likely. The knight goes to E7, and basically he's shifting that knight over to G6 so it can hit the F4 square and be a part of the attack on white's king. D4 makes sense. Carlsen is playing on the side of the board. He's leaving his king in the middle, and the main strategy when that happens is you play in the center of the board and try to open up lines, if at all possible. You would counter an attack on the wing by playing in the center. The knight goes to G6. DE5 makes perfect sense. DE5. And black has this F4 square, but the lines are open in the center, and at some point black may have to worry about his king. The knight goes to F1. One ridiculous computer line here is knight E5. The computers actually say white should go ahead and grab that pawn, but the variation is crazy. After capturing on E5, bishop to F2 check by black. And when the king retakes, knight to G4 check, king G1, knight takes E5. And then in this position, the computer recommends knight to F3, seemingly just hanging the white bishop on C4. But after knight C4, queen D4 comes in with an attack on the knight and the rook. And it's still a fairly equal position according to the computers, but I thought I'd show you that crazy line. But this knight goes to F1, obviously. Looks like it's going to jump into E3 where it can hit F5 or E5. Queen to E7. So now this pawn is completely protected. It's protected by the knight and by the queen. And black's king has total flexibility. The back rank has been cleared, and he can castle on either side of the board. The knight goes to E3 and long castling, which is not a surprise. And not only does that put the king on the other side of these pawns, it also places his rook opposite, the white queen on D1. So Arjun moves the queen to C1. Queen to E2 might have been a little better, but he was worried, I think, about knight to F4. So that makes sense that he would be concerned about that. Queen to C1 has an interesting idea of advancing the B pawn and actually moving this queen to the A3 square if possible. So this queen is in a position to attack also. Rook H to E8, basically Carlsen just completely centralizes all of his forces, ready to attack. And Arjun plays B4, trying to open up lines on the king side. If Magnus were to just take that pawn after rook to B1, white's probably just winning here. Too many open lines aiming at black's king in that position. So Magnus does not do that. What he does instead is play the move A4 because he wants to clog these lines up. He doesn't want these lines to be open, aiming at his king. he wants them to be blocked. So he plays a4 to block those lines of attack. Now knight to f5. Arjun puts the knight on a very strong square, aims at the queen at e7, and the queen tucks back to f8. By the way, if you're getting value from this video, be sure to subscribe and hit the like button and the bell notification for future videos. And the reason he moves his queen to f8 is because taking with the bishop is actually a blunder. After pawn takes knight to f4, knight takes e5, white is doing very, very well with these. The bishop and knight are aiming at f7. There's x-ray against the queen. So Magnus wants no part of that. So he plays queen to f8. Queen to c2 adds to the defense of the e4 pawn. The knight finally jumps into the f4 square, rook a to d1, centralizing. And now with the queen off of e7, Magnus feels like he can chop off that knight at f5, and he does. Now, the natural move, the instinctive move, is to just take the bishop back, right? You capture my knight, I capture your bishop. But instead, Arjun plays this very strong response, queen to a4. Not only does he counterattack the a7 bishop, instead of capturing on f5, this capture of the bishop would make black's king very vulnerable. It would almost be impossible to avoid mate. So you would think, well, Carlsen would just play king to b8 to defend the bishop. But first, he plays rook takes d1. And he exchanges those rooks and only then plays king to b8. Now, what's the purpose of this? Well, one idea may be what happens next. After pawn takes bishop e4, and now this pawn is threatening to come to e3 and open up lines and extend this bishop's diagonal toward the king. And this rook was on e1, is now on d1, which means it has less control over the e3 square. I think that might have been the idea behind exchanging those rooks. The knight goes to d4 and now e3, as we were discussing. Pawn takes, rook takes e3, and Carlsen's threat is quite serious. He's threatening to play knight to e4, which would attack the c3 square, where there would also be a fork of the queen and the rook. So this knight to e4 threat is very, very serious. Arjun plays bishop to f2, attacking the rook. And here, instead of moving the rook, Carlsen plays queen to e7. He defends the rook. He's willing to give up an exchange because he knows if the queen lands on e3 with check, he's going to have all kinds of tactical pressure after the knight goes to g4. And in fact, in this position, he is threatening bishop takes knight, pawn takes, and then knight to g4. And here, this would just be completely winning for black. The game would be over. There are just too many pieces hovering around a white's king. So in this position, Arjun takes the rook, the bishop. Queen takes e3 check, and here he avoids the blunder king to h1. That's a mistake because then bishop takes knight, cd4, and knight to g4, and there are just too many threats. The threat of knight to f2 and the classic smothered mate is on the board, and if rook to f1 defending against that, just queen to e4 with threats of mate on g2 and just all kinds of trouble. White is totally lost in that position, so Arjun plays the move king to f1. Now, this is a very important position for the game because Arjun has a very, very serious threat in this position. If Magnus plays knight to g4, which looks to me like the most natural move on the board, he's threatening mate in two different ways. Queen to f2 mate, and also knight takes h2 would also be checkmate because the king would have nowhere to go, but it's a blunder because if he were to play knight to g4, then knight to c6 check would win the game. After pawn takes knight, which would be forced, rook to d8 check, king to b7, queen to a6 checkmate. The bishop defends the queen, and black would actually lose after the move knight to g4. It turns out there is one winning move for black. Every other move for black loses. And while I was watching this game live, I'm saying, because I did have access to the computer, like most of the people watching the game, is Carlsen going to make this move? Because I would never have guessed this move in a million years. It is a brilliant move. We waited for it, and we saw that the move was this, knight 4 to d5, and Carlsen makes this brilliant move. The idea of this move is first to block the rook's access to d8 so there would be no check. But then it is to distract the bishop, and Arjun takes the knight to distract the bishop so the bishop would not support a mate on a6. And now knight to g4, and the game is over. There is nothing Arjun can do. It is all over. The variation we just looked at of knight to c6 check, you just take the knight. There's no check at d8. There's no queen-supported check on a6. That's it, and Arjun Erigaisi resigns after one of the most amazing moves I have ever seen any player play, including Magnus Carlsen. And even after this great game, there's a lot more great content from Magnus Carlsen that I think you'll enjoy. Be sure to check out this video right here for more of it. See you again soon. Bye.